There is a specific moment this video is about. You are in a group chat with people you have known for years. Someone sends something, a reference, a joke, a question about the weekend, and you start typing a response. You get 3 sentences in and then you stop. Not because you have nothing to say, because the full version of what you would actually say does not fit here. It would require too much context, too much explanation of territory they have not traveled, so you delete it. Write something shorter, something that lands correctly in the register the conversation is using, and you put your phone down. And in the silence after that, in the small, private moment of having translated yourself into something more portable, something registers, not resentment, not superiority, something quieter and more honest than either of those. The recognition that the distance between what you typed and what you deleted was not small. Or this: you are at a gathering with people who love you, who have known you long enough to have a genuine and accurate sense of who you are. The conversation runs the way it always runs. The rhythm is familiar. The affection is real. And at some point during the evening, not at a single moment, not triggered by anything specific, you notice that you are not all the way in the room, that you are present in every way that can be observed, and somewhere slightly behind all of it at the same time. That the version of you this conversation is reaching is real, but not complete. That there is interior territory you are carrying tonight that this room has no coordinates for. You drive home. The question arrives before you can construct a defense against it. Is this what growth actually costs? Not the dramatic losses, not the betrayals that at least give both parties something to understand, but this: the slow, sorrowful widening of a gap that no one made, that no one intended. That belongs, in the most honest accounting available, to no one's failure. Carl Jung spent a lifetime tracing the interior journey toward wholeness. He was honest, in ways that most interpreters of his work prefer to soften, about what that journey costs relationally. He understood that becoming more genuinely yourself does not leave your relational world unchanged. He called it part of the price of individuation. He did not suggest it could be avoided, and he did not pretend it was comfortable. What is happening to you is not a failure of love. It is not the relationship's failure or the other person's failure. It is the natural, inevitable, and genuinely painful consequence of a process that is working exactly as it is supposed to, which is part of what makes it so difficult to name. For most of a man's early adult life, his interior world and his relational world grow in something like parallel. The friendships that form during this period, the intimacies that develop, these are not simply external structures. They are part of how he knows himself. The experience of being recognized by someone who has watched you across years, who holds a version of you built from actual shared evidence. This is not a luxury. It is psychological infrastructure. It gives the inner life a ground to stand on. Jung gave a name to this condition. He called it participation mystique, the unconscious merger of self with the human world surrounding it. In this state, a man's sense of what is real, what matters, who he is, these are held partly outward, in the conversations that confirm them, in the people who reflect them back, in the shared terrain that makes genuine meeting possible without requiring translation. For a long time, this is not experienced as dependence. It feels like belonging. And it is, in its early forms, a genuine and necessary form of it. Then something begins to shift. Not always through a single event, often through the accumulated weight of interior movement that has been occurring, largely below the surface of ordinary life for longer than the conscious mind was paying full attention. Experiences that reorganize something fundamental. Questions that surfaced in solitude and did not resolve when the company returned. a gradual, quiet emergence of values and perceptions too particular to this specific life, this specific passage, to be fully held by a shared world that did not travel through them. The interior becomes more precisely itself, more shaped by the actual contours of what this man has been through. And slowly, without announcement, the gap between what he carries internally and what the relational world around him can hold begins to widen. He is the one who feels it first. He begins to notice he is translating, not dishonestly, not with any intention of concealment, but because the full version of what he thinks and has been through does not have a clean path into the language the relationship is always used. He edits, not from cowardice, but from something more difficult to name. The recognition that what he would need to explain in order to be fully understood is more than the conversation can carry, without becoming something other than what it is. This is the part that almost no one addresses with adequate honesty. The people he loves have not failed him. They are, in many cases, exactly as they have always been, which is precisely part of what makes this so disorienting. If they had changed for the worse, the distance would have an object. If there had been a rupture, the grief would have a form. But what is happening is something more structurally honest than either of those. He has moved in a direction they have not followed, and the gap is now wide enough that crossing it would require more translation than either party knows how to perform. He goes through the motions of the old closeness with a fidelity that is genuine. The affection is real, the history is real, the care is real, while something underneath registers with a quiet and undeniable accuracy that he is not fully there. That the version of him this conversation is reaching is a real version, but not the whole one. The unbearable irony, and Jung would name this immediately, is that the distance tends to be most painful with the people he loves most. Because what is lost is not a bad relationship. What is lost is the complete version of a good one. Jung was precise about something that the contemporary discourse around psychological growth consistently softens. Individuation. The genuine process of becoming who you actually are, as distinct from who you were trained to be, is an inherently differentiating process. It does not make you better than other people. It makes you more specifically, more irreducibly yourself. And genuine specificity generates genuine solitude. Not the solitude of isolation, not the solitude of defensive withdrawal, but the solitude that comes from having an interior that has become too particular to be fully shared. Too precisely shaped by this life, these losses and reorganizations, to be completely translatable into a shared language built on common terrain. The mechanism that produces this is one of individuation's most misunderstood operations. Projection. The unconscious distribution of inner material onto the people around us does not only move darkness outward. A man projects his unlived potential, his capacity for understanding, his idealized self. The people who feel most deeply resonant, who seem to carry the quality of genuine recognition, they are often, in part, mirrors for this projective content. The profound sense of being known that characterizes the most important relationships is not entirely false, but neither is it entirely about the other person. When individuation proceeds at genuine depth, projections are withdrawn, not by decision, not through effort. They are withdrawn because the man begins to integrate what was formerly cast outward. The understanding he always felt understood by becomes something he can supply from within. The qualities he experienced as living most fully in certain friendships begin to find their address inside him, rather than in the faces of the people he has known longest. And when the projection withdraws, the relationship is left carrying its own actual weight, its real weight, which is sometimes, not always, but sometimes, less than the projected weight was. Not because the relationship was false, because something that was partly performing the function of inner completion has come home. And what remains, without that underground current, is real and honest and irreversibly changed. This is the mechanism beneath the experience of outgrowing people. Not superiority, not the other person's failure to keep pace. The structural consequence of a man becoming less psychologically dependent on the relational field to locate and confirm what now lives inside him. Nietzsche had a word for the loneliness this produces, Einsamkeit. And his honesty about it is worth sitting with directly. He understood that the man who becomes genuinely himself becomes, in a precise sense, genuinely uncommon. And what is uncommon is genuinely difficult to share. Not impossible, but requiring something of both parties that cannot be assumed. The willingness to remain in contact with someone who is no longer entirely legible. The capacity to love without complete comprehension. Most men cannot do this for each other. Not from failure of character. From the ordinary limits of what human attention has been trained to require of connection. Here is the part that almost never gets named honestly. Not the contempt, the defensive conversion of grief into hierarchy that the ego reaches for when the distance becomes undeniable. That move is real, and it deserves to be named for what it is. The pain of genuine loss wearing the costume of advancement. The man who tells himself he has outgrown people in the sense of surpassing them is a man who cannot yet hold the grief of simply having moved somewhere they cannot follow. But that is not the part that runs deepest in the men who are actually doing this work. The part that runs deepest is the guilt, the quiet, persistent, slightly irrational conviction that the distance is his fault, that growing was a form of departure, that by moving into territory his people cannot follow, he has abandoned them without having gone anywhere they could see, that what he experiences is development. They may experience as a version of him becoming gradually less reachable, less present, less the person they thought they knew. This guilt carries real information. Growth, inside a relational context, is never purely private. It alters the shape of what can be shared. It changes the character of what was previously felt as closeness. The people who loved the version of him he was did, in a genuine sense, lose something when that version became insufficient to contain him. That loss is real. It deserves acknowledgement. But the guilt is also aimed at the wrong object. A man is not responsible for the fact that his psyche grows. He did not outgrow his people in order to hurt them. He outgrew them because the alternative, the slow, invisible self-betrayal of keeping himself legible at the cost of remaining static, produces the kind of interior that has already been described in this channel's earlier work. The exhausted, motionless, empty interior of a man who stayed comprehensible and lost himself in the process. But here is where honesty has to become uncomfortable, and this is the part of the experience that this particular script will not let you pass through without sitting with. Some of what you are experiencing as outgrowing is not outgrowing. Some of the distance you feel, some of the sense that the people around you cannot reach the level you are now operating at, is not development. It is shadow material wearing development's clothing. The man who has genuinely done interior work knows the difference. The man who has been telling himself he is doing interior work often does not. Because the two feel almost identical from the inside, at least initially. Both produce a sense of distance from the ordinary social world. Both generate the feeling of carrying something the relational field cannot fully hold. Both make the available conversations feel insufficient. But one is genuine differentiation. The other is the psyche using the language of growth to protect itself from the specific friction of genuine encounter. The friction that would, if met honestly, reveal something about itself that the interior silence cannot show. Ask it directly. Is this distance the result of movement? Or is it the result of a self that has decided, beneath the philosophical language, that being genuinely known is still too costly to risk? Is the territory you are carrying that the conversation cannot reach, does it actually exist? Or is it the possibility of that territory used as protection against discovering whether it does? This is not a comfortable question. It is not meant to be. It is the specific discomfort this experience is asking for, and avoiding it, even through sophisticated introspective language, is still avoidance. The man doing real work sits with the question without resolving it prematurely. The work this experience calls for is not resolution. The distance does not close. The grief does not disappear. What becomes possible is something more demanding and more honest. A relationship with this experience that does not require it to be something other than what it is. The first thing it requires is the refusal to convert grief into verdict. If you have been inside this, the quiet dimming of resonance with people who still matter to you, the most important psychological act available is to refuse the frame that converts the experience into evidence. Evidence that you have surpassed them. Evidence that the love was always insufficient. Evidence that this was inevitable and that the distance is simply the correction of an earlier misperception. None of that is what is happening. What is happening is loss. And loss requires grief, not explanation. Not the performance of grief, not the announcement of it. The genuine interior willingness to feel the weight of a specific and real diminishment. The diminishment of something that once held more of you than it now can. Let it be what it is, without the defensive conversion that makes it more manageable in the short term and less real in every term that follows. The second thing it requires is a distinction that this experience is specifically designed to force. The difference between loving someone and requiring them to fully comprehend you. What you had with the people you have outgrown was real. The love was real. The history is real. None of that is revoked by the fact that genuine meeting has become more partial than it was. But there is a form of loving that can only feel like love when it is total, when the other person inhabits the same interior register, speaks the same psychological language, can follow the conversation all the way to where it actually goes. This form of love is genuine, and it is insufficient to what mature relationship can be. Jung was explicit that the deepest relational capacity available to a psychologically individuated man is not the merger of early belonging. It is what he called relatedness from the self. The capacity to be genuinely present with another person across genuine difference. To love someone you do not fully understand, and to let that love be real without requiring it to be complete. This is not resignation. It is the most sophisticated relational capacity available to a human being. The capacity to love accurately. To love what is actually there, rather than what was once there, or what you need to be there, or what would make the love feel sufficient. To offer what you actually have, honest presence, real warmth. Whatever genuine meeting is still possible, without requiring the relationship to provide what it can no longer provide in order for it to count. And alongside this, something else is being asked for, and it requires honesty to name it without softening. The man who has moved into new interior territory is not excused from the ongoing search for genuine encounter. The developmental loneliness that accompanies outgrowing people is real, and it deserves to be taken seriously as a need, rather than transcended as a weakness. What is sought now is no longer total comprehension. It is the presence of another person who is also seriously engaged with the depth of their own interior, who can sit inside difficulty without immediately resolving it, who brings genuine uncertainty to the questions rather than settled answers. Such people exist. They are not common, and they are not always available inside the relational world a man currently inhabits. But the willingness to move toward them, not as replacements for what was lost, but as the form that genuine meeting takes at this stage is part of what this passage is asking for. This is where Frankl's contribution becomes specific rather than general. He observed that meaning, not comfort, not clarity, but meaning, is not constructed inside the private account of one's own development. It emerges through what a man gives across the distance his growth has created. The man who has outgrown his relational world faces a particular Franklian question. Not whether others can match his depth, but whether he is willing to offer what his depth has made him capable of offering to people who are still in territory he has already moved through. Whether his development has produced generosity or only discernment. That question does not resolve in the silence. It only becomes answerable in contact. If you have been carrying this, the quiet sorrow of conversations that run but no longer carry the current they once did, of being with people who love you and feeling, underneath the love, a distance that no one made and no one can entirely close. I want to close with something that carries no borrowed comfort. What is happening to you is not arrogance. It is not coldness. It is not the symptom of a self that has grown too enclosed to remain in genuine contact with the human world. It is the specific, real, and genuinely difficult cost of becoming more fully and irreducibly yourself. That process creates genuine uniqueness. Genuine uniqueness creates genuine gaps, and genuine gaps between people who love each other produce a form of grief that deserves to be met honestly, rather than converted into something more comfortable. You are not above the people you have outgrown. You are different from who you were when the closeness was total. And they are different too, in their own directions, which do not always intersect with yours. The love between you is not revoked by the distance. It is simply required to become something more accurate than it was. Something that does not depend on complete comprehension in order to remain real. Hold also the harder question, whether the distance is entirely what you believe it is. Whether some of what you are protecting in the name of development is simply the old wound finding a more sophisticated language. The man who can sit inside both of these simultaneously, who can grieve the genuine loss and interrogate the convenient story, is doing something rarer than either grief or growth alone. You did not outgrow these people because you stopped caring. You outgrew this particular form of closeness because something in you required it. And the grief you feel about that is not evidence the growth was wrong. It is evidence that the love was real. The mature version of that love, the kind that can remain genuinely present across genuine difference, that can grieve what has changed without destroying what remains, that can offer what it has without requiring the other person to hold what they cannot. This is not a lesser love than the merger it replaces. It is, in the most honest sense available, the first version of love that is fully chosen, not because the closeness is gone, because you are offering it anyway.